Welcome to Film Strip, movie reviews presented by Continuous Play Podcast. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Kurt.
And this is our review of Paths of Glory, starring Kirk Douglas, Ralph Meeker, Adolphe Menjou, Georgie McCready, Wayne Morris, and Richard Anderson. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, released in 1957 on a budget of $900,000 to wide critical acclaim, was nominated even for some top awards back in its day. An anti-war war film. And I guess it's time to talk about now. This won't be the first time we broach the subject of war in Kubrick. In fact, it's one of his most consistent muses.
Oh, yeah, big time. I mean, a lot of his movies do revolve around one form or another, what happens when guys kill each other.
Indeed, and I think it's neat to put ourselves in time of the context. 1957 was post-World War II, obviously, was Korean War time, but we were doing a lot of war movies at the time. Most of them were your John Wayne and Kirk Douglas, rah-rah Americana, kick the Germans and the Japs back to the Stone Age kind of movies. I mean, you go watch them, and I mean, there's some really good films from that time, too. Some of them serve as pseudo-propaganda, and some of them are, again, those Americanized Western versions of World War II and things like that. But World War I is the conflict I've always felt like kind of got lost in cinematic history. I mean, there's All Quiet on the Western Front and this one, and I can't think of too terribly many World War I films.
Yeah, I mean, there's about 7 million World War II movies for every one World War I movie.
Exactly.
And I'm not exactly sure why, because the more I find out about World War I, the more it sounds like it's ripe for movies. Even just watching this movie, I can't help but think, well, why didn't like John Wayne make a movie set in the trenches or something? And yeah,
I can only venture the guess of this is that in our world, particularly Western cinema, the United States of America got involved in World War I very, very late in that conflict. If you look through history, we really weren't in it that long, but the French and the British and the Germans and everyone, they were involved in it for many more years than we were. So part of it, I think, is the fact that America just wasn't in it as much. And, we were living in a society that was not a global, knowledgeable society. I mean, you knew as much about the people in Germany as you probably knew about the people the state over. There was no way to really know any of this stuff. It's not like the age we live in now where if I want to know what it's like to live and work in Japan, I can go on YouTube and find 500 videos of people telling me what that experience is like, which you couldn't do that 10 years ago, much less, back in 1957. So I think that part of it is there's a disconnect just in terms of geography and also in time that America spent in it. You got to also think about, too, in World War II, America's political machine and media machine had grown to such a much larger rate than what it was in the 19-teens that the story was being told in our media on a daily basis, whereas World War I, we were lucky to get reports, weeks apart sometimes. This is a different time in some things. And I'll also say this, too. World War I and the real crux of wars like Vietnam and things like that share a lot in common in that they are not these large waves of sustained action like the Battle of Midway and Pearl Harbor and stuff like that. They are these dirty, gritty, in the trenches, throwing grenades at each other's feet, cutting each other up with knives, throwing rocks at each other. I mean, it was nasty. And I think for Americans in particular, Vietnam kind of replaced the nasty war in our culture from World War I, and I do think that's cinematically is one of the reasons that we've got 5 million Vietnam War movies to every World War I movie too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and one of the reasons I am fascinated by World War I is it's the first proper major war when we're talking about these heavy machines of tanks and planes, and they're and now all wars are horrific. There's no question about it. But every single story I hear about World War I makes me think like that's if you had to pick a war, that would probably be the last one. And especially when you talk about those trenches, this may be one reason that they don't make the World War I movies now, is because to be realistic, you would have to show just how horrific the trenches were. And the first thing that comes to mind is just one thing is that there was no real plumbing naturally in these trenches dug in sometimes the heat of the moment. So the middle of the fighting, there's nowhere else to go to the washroom. So there's so many stories of how, in the middle of these intense battles, the trenches are flooded, not just with not just urine, but with blood and vomit, and of course any rain that seeped in. So it just turns every trench into a swamp. And the fact that you have to go through that kind of hellish conditions and try and fight and kill people, that to me is like it's a true horror show. Like even Kubrick at the time, I wonder if he would want to, but there's no way you could put that on screen back then. Even now, people might they'd be more disgusted than horrified.
Yeah, it would be very hard to get anybody to even accept it or shoot it. I think people would try it, but and they have tried it, I think, as we've gotten, quote, grittier and more realistic with our depictions of war films and things like that. But no one can really capture the horrible conditions that these men fought in, lived in, and survived in. And, you watch a movie like this and then you do any kind of reading on trench warfare, and it made me curious. I went and watched a couple of docs on trench warfare and stuff after this, and it's just amazing anybody survived it. And I think about it now, and I'm like, man, the current generations running the world, we would all be dead. Nobody has the toughness to pull it. I'm sorry, Vin and Rock. You may be throwing each other out of buildings and fast, whatever, but you would die. And it's like these guys were so gritty and tough, and you could see how something like this would screw them up. I remember having a Time Life book. I think my parents had it actually, but we had it around the house when I was a kid, Kirk, and it had this picture of this soldier with the 1,000-yard stare, right? And it was from a scene in World War I that an artist had painted, and it was memories of the war. And I just always remember being just taken by just how gory it was, but the look on the face, and then you see these men as they're portrayed in these different scenes here, and how you can see how someone can be just psychologically completely broken by an experience like this. Not to mention what's actually going to happen to the people in this story, which is amazing in and of itself.
Oh yeah, and you make a good point about this. And sometimes it's easy to forget about this when you hear about World War II or World War I. Is you do sometimes forget these guys in the war. These aren't pretty much most of these guys are not battle-hardened guys that have been in 50 battles that are experts at what they do. So many of them are just a guy who maybe up to a month ago was sweeping up dirt in a store or pumping your gas, and now they're expected to do these things that, again, it's like you would spend the rest of your life in prison probably if it was between that and doing some of the stuff you hear about in World War I.
Yeah, and it's a good time to remind people, too, that, again, this is Kubrick adapting a book. And, I don't know much about the book that this is based on. I understand it's a rather loose adaptation from whatever Humphrey Cobb wrote, but it's pretty well close to the main story, and that itself is based upon a true story of French soldiers being executed for cowardice in World War I. So it's based in somewhat a reality, but it's not telling a person's story. But again, I feel like this is one of those things that Kubrick runs across a book and he can't get it out of his head, and then he comes up with a way to film it now. And $900,000 in 1957, that was some dough. I mean, nobody put money down like that on a movie. And what's the amazing thing about this one is that it's so short. It's 88 minutes, which is not something you generally associate with Kubrick. That's usually when he gets warmed up. It's 88 minutes. And there's almost no score to this. I mean, there's very little music other than just drum and fife. It's mostly sound. And I could see a 1950s audience really being taken in by the soundscape and the long, big, wide tracking shots of the battle as these men move across the battlefield from trench to trench. I mean, you can really see a lot of what will become some of Kubrick's real trademarks, I guess we'd say, or fingerprints on films in this film with the way some of it's shot and the way it works.
Oh, yeah, and you talk about audiences at the time being, sucked into it. I might, I love this movie, but I can totally see the exact opposite for the time, because especially when you're talking about like the horror of World War I and that use of the insane sound for the time, the fact that this is an anti-war film, it's like this is absolutely not John Wayne about a movie about gung ho and fighting for your country and defeating the bad guys. This is about guys that are just they're in their heads. They're really hoping this war comes to an end without their involvement at all. Like because they're having to bear witness to so much horrifying stuff. And I was thinking like, there's no way in 1957 people were ever going to make a movie like Platoon, and not just because the Vietnam War hadn't come out, but about a movie that says, that the military is not necessarily a good thing, and sometimes they do some really horrible stuff, and sometimes to their own guys. And this is a story like it's so kind of disturbing psychologically to think about people had to go through at least one guy for real had to go through, and like if it wasn't based on a book, it'd be almost tough to believe. It's like, what do you mean you try someone for cowardice? How do you measure that? And then you find out it's based on a true story. It's like, Jesus.
Well, that's the thing. There's only two militaries at the time who did not execute people for cowardice: the United States of America and Australia. Now, America actually sentenced guys to it, but they never carried out the sentences, in the past. And so this was something that European armies did. And I think that's the thing Kubrick is trying to bring to the audience, and it's probably why, again, it's critically acclaimed, but people may have bought this and been like, wow, okay, I don't really know how to feel about it, because, again, it's foreign to us. And I want to tell you, the master stroke in the selling of this, though, comes down to Kirk Douglas, American treasure as a cinematic, and as of this recording of this podcast, 100 years old and still kicking.
Can't believe it.
The man is made out of steel. He's got to be. But just such a neat actor. But, we think of him as these tough guy roles a lot of times because he really played a lot of them, and he'll play some more of them for Kubrick later on. But he's not playing the tough guy here. I mean, he is. He's brave and all that stuff, but he's a leader. He's an intellectual. And I think what Kubrick wants to do here is have a war film where we can talk about the ethics and politics of war, and that logically, yes, this makes sense. You can't have men that will not advance and fight. But on the other hand, does it really do any good to execute them and try to motivate the other men? Does that really work? And also, isn't there always somebody else's motivation at play here? And I mean, that's really the play that is centered around this. I mean, the war is almost the B story to this film.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And talking about Kirk Douglas, he was known for these kind of gritty, tough guy roles, and he is a tough guy in this. But his thing is like he's such an intelligent guy, and a guy with like his whole thing in this movie is just common sense. He's one of the only guys. He's the only officer in the movie who is like really good at his job, has a good sense of what he's doing, and knows how to do what the right thing is. And the fact that no one above him cares about the right thing is that's part of the whole. That's really one of the anti-war messages. Is that sometimes the bosses are just absolute idiots doing things for the dumbest reasons. and you also get a scary sense that like there's a scene where Kirk Douglas says this, what we've done today is going to haunt you guys for the rest of your lives, and you even get the sense it's probably not. These guys are just that disconnected and aristocratic that they're thinking about the wine they're going to have that night with dinner. They're like, it's not sinking into them, but it is really sinking into to Kirk Douglas's character.
Oh, big time. And I mean, I think too that's part of the fun in watching this. If you're going to gain anything out of it, is this is really a courtroom drama too. And I'm a sucker for those. I don't know about you. I've talked about it in another podcast. I love like all the John Grisham stuff. Like I've watched him and read most of his books, and I love any kind of good legal thriller. Like I like some of Aaron Sorkin's stuff because it does some of those sort of political thrillers. And then there was this thing in the 80s and 90s where we just got obsessed with like lawyers and law case stuff and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm always a sucker for that kind of stuff. And I love how this one works here too, because there's lots of different military tribunals that can be portrayed, but I've never seen one like this. And what's amazing is how like dead on it is. Like that people use this as it's actually a pretty good template for how a military court-martial would have gone in 1914, in the French army. And again, it's something that would have been really far into the American audience here, but I could see the lavishness of all of it. And the performances really being the thing that draws people in. I guess before we go any further, though, Kurt, we need to give people the plot summary because, again, this is not one that I know a lot of people may have seen unless you've just gone out of your way to get it. I didn't know it was a Kubrick thing. I knew I'd seen part of it before somewhere along the way, but not really until watching it for our review here had I ever really sat down and chewed through it. So why don't you tell people what the plot of Paths of Glory is?
Glory-seeking General Moreau, played by George McCready, directs Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, to lead a charge against an enemy position in the trench warfare of World War I. Despite Dax's own protests that this attack is futile in nature and will only result in heavy losses, he follows orders, but none of his men reach the German trenches. Unable to mount any morale for another offensive, Dax and his men stay in their trench. Moreau orders his military to fire upon his own men to spur them into battle, but the commanding officer refuses. After the battle, Moreau accuses his soldiers of cowardice and court-martials 3 men, 1 man from each company, as scapegoats for his own failings. Dax, who was a lawyer in civilian life, attempts to defend his men, leading to a further rift between he and the commanding officers who differ philosophically on the very nature of war. The trial is a farce, with the 3 men found guilty, and Dax is forced to lead the firing squad to execute the convicted. In the end, Moreau's commanding officer, General Brulard, brings an investigation on him for the order to fire upon his own men. Brulard offers Moreau's command to Dax, who reveals his idealism is not a ploy for promotion, but his true nature, which alienates him from General Brulard. Dax and his men are ordered to return to the battlefront, which Dax delays, telling his soldiers as he sees them enjoy a peaceful moment watching a girl sing before his face gives away his resignation to their inevitable return to war.
I love how you say that Dax reveals his idealism is not a ploy for promotion and his true nature when he basically tells that guy to go to hell. I mean, that's what he does. He does a Rhett Butler. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. It's a great moment. But so much to dig in and unpack there. Kurt, and I think you did a good job of summarizing it. We talked a lot about trench warfare in World War I, and this movie, again, does a really good job of introducing that concept to us. And I just put myself back in the time in 1957. I feel so spoiled nowadays because you can do this on a television show on network TV now, right? Like this would be production level value we could pull off if we pulled it together enough. But back then, this was an amazing looking thing, and it's black and white too. And I wanted to ask you about your thought on that. I mean, this was at a point in cinema where they were black and white. There was a lot of color, and I'm sure it was a budget reason. But I kind of think the aesthetic of the black and white helps tell the story here too.
Oh, absolutely. Black and white, that's a big theme of this movie is, what is really good and what's good and what's evil. Like supposedly the Germans are the bad guys. We don't even see a single one of them. Like we never even guys,
see them. Yeah,
absolutely. Bad guys are supposedly the guys that are supposed to be looking out for you in this movie.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, and I think you've hit on it there, is that this is a discussion of what is right, what is wrong, this black and white, and really though this movie is a bunch of gray mess. And I kind of feel like that's Kubrick's entire message here is that life is mostly gray mud. You know, and I mean, really, Dax even goes as much to say that in a lot of ways. And I don't know, you get that immediate contrast though, because you see the just wretched conditions that these men are fighting and working and living in, right? And then you go to meet our two generals, Brillard and Moreau, who I got to tell you, I know I'd seen these actors in other things, but what fabulous performances. I mean, George McReady is so mustache-twirlingly evil, but yet he's really just a political animal, right? Like, that's his entire motivation here.
Oh, yeah. Like in the last podcast when I was talking about The Killing, I talked about there's a certain kind of very old school, very 50s movie acting, I might call it, nasty, very, like in a way that, people don't really talk like that, man. And these two generals are kind of like that, but this is a case where that really helps the film because it makes these guys, they are so aristocratic that it really amplifies how detached they are from whether it's the real world or just the lives of their men who are these blue-collar guys. And these guys are, they're drinking their brandy in this, Marie Antoinette's, cabin in the woods.
Yeah, let them eat cake. Yeah, I mean, really, these two guys are so disconnected from the front lines, and this is what I think gives this movie any kind of modern staying power. Because if you can't relate to the war side of it, there's a lot of us who can't, so that's fine. But most people work in an office setting or work in an organization where you feel like the higher ups don't really get what you have to do every day to pull off this stuff. They just want you to go do it. And I'm sitting there, relating this to my work day. And I was having a conversation with Nick, our podcast partner, about this and telling him about this. And I don't think he's seen this movie, but just me describing it, he said, that sounds exactly like my workplace, just without all the guns and the killing, But I mean, really, you think about it, I think that's the story Kubrick wants to tell is not so much the war story, it's the politics story. I think he's interested in the politics of it, and not what makes the French want to attack the Germans, but that this French general, who clearly didn't get that role for no reason, but somewhere along the way sold out, right? And now is just all about the positioning.
Yeah, it's an interesting, watching the movie a second time, it's interesting, like the first minute or two with Moreau, when he's faced with this, he's being told to attack the anthill. His first reaction is, he sounds like one of the good guys. Like, we can't do it. We don't have the manpower. But he says, but then his boss says, well, there's a promotion in for you. And then he totally changes his tune. You realize, this guy's got his head up his ass. He's totally just about climbing the ladder. And he reminds me a lot of, he's a little bit more evil in this, but a great film, one of the best films about war, Terrence Malick's Thin Red Line. Two particular characters. Nick Nolte's character plays this colonel who wants to make his mark in the war, no matter what the cost. He keeps water away from his men just to keep them moving forward, just to try to take the Guadalcanal. And there's another character in that movie who is also a lawyer, who's deeply concerned about his men. And I thought about those two movies. I don't know if Malick was influenced at all. Or if there's any connection at all, but I think of those two movies a lot. Like Thin Red Line is the World War II version of Paths of Glory, kinda.
I'm glad you mentioned that one because I remember that movie distinctly, again, from childhood, having seen it. And I haven't seen it in a number of years, but I was thinking about it often while watching this one. I'll tell you, this reminds me of is a movie called The Big Red One, which I saw growing up. Again, I think it's a movie from the late 70s, early 80s, and it's another one of those harrowing war films. And it reminded me a lot of this one as well. So I do think the fingerprints of this are found throughout because I think the theme is something that is repeatable. Again, it's men in power who will use pawns to get where they want to go, and they have no connection to these men. They don't care. And that's the immediate contrast when we meet Dax and his men is he's a colonel, but in those days in particular, that meant you were leading the charge. And by leading the charge, people, he put a helmet on, he drew a .38 revolver, and he blew a whistle like a referee or a coach and led them on the charge. That's what this man did. And he was really like a coach on the field. It was neat to watch. But you see the respect that he commands, and he doesn't have to ask for it. Like these other men come into the room and everybody has to shape up and ship out and all that kind of stuff. Dax just walks down the corridor and he's not doing anything to draw any attention. He's just checking on his men, and they all, give him the look. They snap to him, I mean, he's obviously someone that has earned their respect, and he knows them by name too. That's the other thing that was really impressive. And I think that's part of his job would be to know those things. Oh
yeah. And, I love the scene where right before we meet Dax, where we finally enter the trenches. So all of a sudden the movie shifts into these tracking shots that really, really put us in those trenches. And I love the bit where we see Moreau. He's being the very pompous general character. Going up to soldiers asking, "Hey, we're ready to kill more Germans?" Like with no concept really to what that means. And he comes across this one soldier who's smiling kind of way too much. And he asks him, "So, looking forward to getting back to your wife?" And the guy totally breaks down with the smile on his face. It's really creepy. And this guy's clearly going through, post-traumatic stress before there was a term for it. And, that's when the movie shifts in tone from this, aristocratic tone of the generals to we're now dealing with, the nitty-gritty darkness of war here.
Well, no, and let's give props to the cinematographer here, George Cross, who is a German cinematographer, and this is kind of the most famous thing he did, at least Western-wise. But think about how hard those tracking shots would be to set up and get in 1957. You're talking about laying miles of track to make that work. And then, they're trying to make it wind through the earth. Because Kubrick will not just do a set. He makes them dig up half the earth to shoot something. Now, they may have just run back and forth in the same, 30 feet or whatever, but all that detail is in there. You can see the knotted roots. I don't know if you've ever dug deep in the ground or not, Kurt. I happened to do a little bit of a gardening project recently where I just started digging through stuff, and you just kind of get below about 4 inches, and it's like amazing some of the stuff you run into. I'm like, I dug a rock up that had probably been underground for I don't know how long, and I'm like, well, that one's in the air now. Probably never expected to be there again. And I thought, what would that have been like in a trench warfare when you're digging 10, 12, 15 feet deep into the earth? And by the way, we should mention that was all done mostly by hand back in those days. That's guys with shovels throwing mounds of dirt outside, and then you've got all that barbed wire too. It's just that's the funny thing about this is, as a black and white film, you think there's really no gradation and you can't see it, but the lighting works so well to give you that sense of you can see the terrain, you can feel the room, you can feel the air almost in it as you're tracking through all those different pieces. And what you get is they lay out the plan to take the anthill, which I think is so aptly named because it doesn't look like much of anything, and it really isn't anything. I was reminded of another Vietnam War film called Hamburger Hill. I don't know if you've ever seen that one or not, but God, it's so named because that's what it looked like on the side of it by the time they took it. And when they took it, the soldiers that took it, recalled standing up, looking around, going, "And for what?" Like it gave them no advantage whatsoever. And there's no advantage even to taking this position. Dax even says so. It's like, what is this even going to do for us? Yeah. And it's nothing but the lead general gives the other general the order, and there's a promotion in it for you if you can do it. Okay, then we're going to go do it. It's like, again, you go to work and you get some random, project you have to complete in a ridiculous amount of time for no reason that seems to make any sense, right? But you just do it because that's what you do. At least that's how I was relating to it. And I kind of felt like that's how Dax was relating it to them too. Like they give him the plan and he's like, this is a bad idea. But then he goes along with it too. I want to ask you what you thought about that, is that he protests, but only to a point.
Oh, yeah. I think Moreau, he breaks it down way too plainly about how we got 8,000 guys and about half of them are going to get killed, but we'll get the job done. We're going to 4,000 guys are going to get killed in 20 minutes, but it'll be worth it in the end. And Dax, he flat out says how moronic it all is. And Moreau's talking about how all of France is counting on him, and he has, and Dax has this great line. He's like, I'm not a bull. I don't need a red flag waved in front of me. And he talks about Samuel Johnson, who said, patriotism was the last refuge of a scoundrel, he says. And right here, then again, the movie shifts into anti-war mode. Dax isn't all about, we'll kick the Germans' asses, live to fight another day. He's like, I'm really only doing this because I'm ordered to, and I like to think my guys can do it, but probably not. And Moreau, he threatens to relieve him, and Dax says, "Look, you can't do that. You can't put someone else in charge." And Dax, Dax would feel better. He's almost like he's like a dad or something. He feels better being around his boys than leaving in the hands of somebody else. No matter, even though it's nothing but bad here. He knows it's going to break bad. But I'd rather be my responsibility than someone else's.
Well, I think it's two things. It's like I said, he's kind of like the coach, right? And he knows those men trust him, and he's not sure that anybody else can possibly motivate him to do any of this. He's not even sure he can do it, but at least he wants to be there when it happens. And I think, too, the one thing about Dax, at least I took off the times I watched it, was that I think he had made or had come to a peace with his own mortality long before these orders came down to, if I get killed doing this, okay. He would sort of resign to that fact. And again, I mean, they lay out the odds there. We're going to lose half the men. And he's like, that's not good. But he also realizes that's actually also quite accurate. I mean, and you think about these kind of decisions that are made, and just think about the type of psyche it takes to be that kind of person. General Moreau, it turns out to be, I don't even know if I want to call him evil. He's just greedy among anything else. But like any greedy man in power who wants more power, he doesn't really see the cost as anything personable. These are just they're like ants. Well, we kill a few thousand of them, whatever. We'll get a few thousand more, but we'll make the objective. So what's the difference? And to think about what it takes to get to the point where you can just write off 3,000 people, it's no big deal to you. That's I just sat there thinking about that, and I thought the psyche that would take. It's fun to think about, and I think that's not in there arbitrarily. Again, this is a lean movie at 88 minutes, and it's a lot of dialogue, and every word in it seems to have a purpose.
Oh yeah, and it's it's you got these two very bizarre characters, just in terms of relatability. You got this one guy who's perfectly willing to throw away 4,000 lives, and you got the one guy who's perfectly willing to be one of those 4,000 guys. And and like Dax again, he's not going to be in the trenches with binoculars leading the charge. Commanding the charge. He's leading the charge with that whistle and the revolver. He knows that anything is that's going to happen to his guys is going to happen to him.
So Dax sends his lieutenant Roger, played by Wayne Morris, on a 2-man scouting mission with one of his other soldiers, who's Corporal Paris, and they're supposed to go up with the scout and just kind of get a sense for the lay of the land, right? This is like tension building right here. I've really found myself sort of sitting on the edge of my seat going, are these guys going to make it back? What are they trying? What's the purpose of this? They don't seem to really even be gathering any good intel. And this lieutenant is the biggest waste of a lieutenant since Gorman got off the drop ship. I mean, really, I'm like, man, I see where they get that from. Again, it's an archetype that gets played a lot because you have these men in leadership positions who have knowledge but don't have any real skill in doing it, and as it turns out, this guy's just a drunk.
Yeah, this whole side of the movie here. It's like a subplot. You could quite possibly remove it from the movie, and the story might still flow. But it's an excellent story in and of itself that could be its own movie. This idiot officer who leads the recon mission while he's drunk, and in a movie about what does it mean to be cowardly or brave in war, we get the grandest act of cowardice in a war movie I can recall, which is he sends one of his guys out towards the Germans. He gets a little jumpy and throws a grenade and runs. Only turns out that he killed his own guy.
Yeah, friendly fire. I mean, they talk about that a lot on a lot of these, a lot of those trench warfare documentaries I watched, and just a lot of any kind of war documentary. Firefights are nasty things. And you get a lot of bullets flying around, and there's a lot of people that got killed by friendly fire that we don't know about even, and nobody will ever tell you because that's just some of the bad stuff that goes down in war. You know, I mean, it's awful, but it's true. And this guy has, I mean, one, he's drunk, so he shouldn't have been out there to begin with. But he's also he's an actual coward. Like that's the, I guess the irony of this is that he's a coward, and in the end, he has to lead part of the firing squad. He's not one of the men set up on it, and he freaks out and throws that grenade and kills the scout, and the other guy finds it. And that's one of the reasons we find out why he gets set up from his company too. So because it's part of a blackmail. It's like you say, it's this sort of Law and Order subplot to this whole thing. It's like you wouldn't even need it in the movie, but the fact that it's there makes it even better.
Oh yeah, and this great performance by this guy Ralph Meeker, who plays what's his name, Corporal
Paris.
Paris, and I haven't seen him in anything else, but he is really good. Just a quick note about the acting overall in this movie. I talked about, generals are very aristocratic, and our guys, the soldiers, they're excellent. It's a terrific bit of acting that Kubrick gets out of this. It's a good point to point out. I think Kubrick was 27 when he made one of the defining war films of all time, which is just amazing. But yeah, this subplot where this surviving guy goes back, fully prepared to rat the officer out, and the officer tries to play it cool. It's like, well, I got as much dirt on you because you're talking back, but deep down that guy knows it's all over if the right people found out. Like he's going to get hanged, he's going to get shot, whatever. And it's also a nice thing that these two guys know each other from before the war, and just by sheer dumb luck or however it turned out, maybe one guy went to college and one didn't. This guy wound up an officer, and this guy's one of the grunts.
Exactly. It's like you feel about it. They knew each other. Maybe they worked in the same company or something like that. But Roger had education or money or something like that. But, Ralph Meeker, the soldier Paris there, I'm sad to say that one other thing I know him from is Kolchak the Night Stalker. He's one of the cops, which, by the way, is awesome. If you haven't revisited that lately, you owe it to yourself to do so. So I'm a bit of a vampire whore anyway, so I'll always say that. But anyway, but no, I love that he falsifies the report. They have this whole conspiracy, and I'm like, this is a movie in and of itself right here. I'm like, this is so, I'm into this so much, and I have no relatable connection to any of it. That's the weird thing about watching this for me is that I don't have any relation to this. I shouldn't be able to connect to this as well as I am. But the performances and the way it's delivered and put in front of me, and I want to say this again about the camera work in this, the way it moves when they are moving in battle scenes, it's kind of like back and to the left over their shoulders a lot of times. Yeah. So you get it's far enough away that you can kind of pick out who the people are, but you also can't. So it gives you that sense of how you could get lost in something like that. But when they want you to really know something, the camera is still. And it's sitting, and you get a wide shot, and you get these men, and when it's really important, you get the close-up, and then you get the other close-up and the two-shot. And all. I mean, it's really kind of neat. And I'm not a big camera buff or anything like that, but I love the way this thing is shot and put together. And reports are that Kubrick this is where he really started his 900 takes kind of thing, and I think it was McCready or one of the other actors got so mad at him one day and it had enough of it and just went off, and all Kubrick did was just sit there and go, okay, well, let's do it again. And then Douglas thought that was awesome. He was like, this guy just railed on him for 10 minutes, and he said, well, okay, let's do it again. And Kubrick, the immense patience, or maybe he just liked messing with people. I don't know. If you ask Shelley Duvall, she'll tell you yes. But anyway, we'll get to that later on. But no, the next morning we're going to do the attack on the anthill, and just as Dax thought, the first wave goes, and they get into no man's land, and it is a huge failure. They make no progress whatsoever. They get none of the German trenches. And B Company refuses to even leave because they see the massacre going in front of them, and they're like, I ain't having none of that. And this is where you get what I think is some of the most intriguing bit back and forth in the film. Moreau is sitting back watching this and is so enraged that he starts calling up the artillery commanders going, I'm going to need you to fire on these guys to get them to move. And he's really just wanting to try to motivate them, which I thought, there's no way. So I looked it up. And yes, this was a real thing that people did throughout history, not necessarily in the American Army, but definitely in this time of World War I. They would fire on their own guys to get them to move. sometimes, just to let them know, like, you're either going to go out there and fight or we're going to kill you ourselves. And I love that the battery commander is like, nope, I'm going to need like a note from your third grade teacher and your social security. You know, like, he's like, nah, not. He's going through every like bureaucratic thing. And that's what's funny to me about it. I guess why I like it so much, Kurt, is that this guy is such a bureaucrat, and he ultimately, his plot is foiled by bureaucracy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that commander who, you know, you think he's just the guy in charge of firing the artillery, and it turns out that he's probably got a law degree in his back pocket saying, I'm not, but he is also, he's also like Dax, he's got common sense. He's like, I'm not going to do that. But if I did, I'm going to need it in writing that I can't be put up against a wall when this is all over and when it does break bad, you idiot.
Yeah. You know what I like is that we don't know anything about that guy. And for all I know, he runs a butcher shop. Yeah. You know, but he's like, nope, we're going to do it the right way. So there's a right way to slice that corned beef or whatever. I mean, I like that he's like, nope, I'm going to do it. We're not going to do, if you want to do something reckless, I'm going to make sure my butt's covered too. Because and that's what's funny here is you realize that all of these men that are in control, from Dax to that artillery commander, Moreau, all of them, know one thing, that no matter what, at some point the buck is going to stop with them, and they have to figure out how they can either handle that, mitigate it, or who they're going to shove it off to. The lieutenant does that too, down to the corporal that we just talked about. And this guy's like, well, you know, when they bring me up on why did you fire on our own men, I'm going to go because the general told me to. Here it is in writing. You know, it's like, there's my get out of jail free card. And but again, I love the fact that he is stopped by bureaucracy. And he's just so enraged by it. Again, I think McCready really sells the performance here because he's a little over the top, but it's perfect for the moment.
Oh, yeah. He's... yeah, no one really follows orders in this movie terribly well from the top on down. And before we move on from this battle scene, I got to mention one of my favorite scenes in the movie is right before the battle scene, like right before the whistle blows. We get this great scene with Joe Turkel, who was in The Killing, and he ends up in as Lloyd, the bartender in The Shining, where he's talking to his buddy, just breaking down what's worse, getting shot in the ass or getting shot in the head, and saying, you know, if he's going to be shot, he'd rather get shot in the ass because that's more or less superficial wound, but the head would hurt a lot more if it didn't kill him. And it's when I think of that's a very Kubrick scene. Like I doubt a lot of other people would go that dark in a movie because it's really effective at, you know, playing on the imagination to, you know, a way to, you know, to place yourself into the minds of some of these guys before the battle, because, you know, you haven't heard a shot, but already you're so nervous after hearing that. It's like you can really feel the fear of the combat. It makes you realize how frightening combat can be, that, you know, hoping you get shot rather than with shrapnel. These are the kind of things that these soldiers are thinking of. Mm-hmm. Especially this battle where, you know, for the last 20 minutes before this scene, they haven't stopped saying how slim the odds of victory are. So all these guys, like, they know they're going to be, you know, chopped meat, you know, within 12 hours. And it also sets up a kind of realistic fear of why a guy might want to turn around when everything breaks bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got Private Arnold Turkel that you're talking about there, and I think what you're seeing and what Kubrick wanted you to see is, what do the lowest level ants, how do they react to this stress-wise? How do they deal with it? And so he gets two of them, and one guy's kind of having a minor freak out, and Arnold's answer to that is, I'm going to talk about something that's very real for both of us, but I'm going to talk about it in such a ludicrous way that it kind of makes us both chuckle a little bit so that we can go and do this. It's like, would you rather be shot in the head or in the ass? You know, it's like, I don't know. You know, it's like, what an odd question to ask, but it does totally take your mind off for just a couple minutes what's happening. You know, what's going on there. And, I mean, it's a bad scene, and forgive me for bringing this one up, but it's kind of like, you know how many kind of shrimp they are, Forrest? You know, I mean, it is a little bit of that. You know, it's that same kind of thing, right? That's what you do. You just talk about mundane stuff before these guys go. And It's not the first time I've heard stories like that, too. So I think it's great. And the thing about the attack, too, I want to mention, Dax really does try to get Company B to move. Like, he's down there like, come on, let's go give it the old Newt Rockney, one Gipper. And he's, like, blowing that whistle and come on. And he tries to go up the ladder and a dead soldier knocks him down. Yeah. And it's like, that's even when he's like, this is friggin' hopeless.
Yeah.
And I mean, he knows. He's like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah, it's like, he's like, deep down, he knew he was right the whole time, and he's like, he feels bad that he can't make it, but he probably feels, maybe slight bit of relief that, well, like these guys aren't going to die because they're quote unquote being cowardly, but also they're using their heads here. I'm not going to run into the where German and French shells are falling and bullets and explosions and stuff.
Well, yeah, and then the thing is that the fallout is, of course, Moreau wants 100 of these people executed for cowardice, and Brulard, understanding that, okay, yes, you're right, we're going to execute these men, sure, but wouldn't just doing a random show, like if we just picked one from each company, wouldn't that be a better, show of force or whatever? Wouldn't that, and it would cost us less men and stuff? And so he agrees to that, and I found that fascinating. I'm like, is that even a real thing? And it is in history that in French companies they would execute like every 10th man in a company. Just to randomly just go 1 through 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, stand out, boom, shot them all, and then everybody go back to the war, and it's like, well, okay, that would get the point across. And what's interesting to me about this is the rationale that these men have for this. Obviously, Moreau wants people to swing so that he can look like an effective commander because he's still bucking for the promotion, right? But they firmly believe that doing this is going to motivate these men to fight further. And I'm just like, I guess it's my 20th century brain here that just can't wrap my mind around, is that even really effective motivation? Like, you're going to kill me or they're going to kill me. Either way, I'm going to get killed. I don't know. I don't know if that really works.
Yeah, it's such a horrible motivating factor. Like, not money, not, any kind of positive reinforcement. It's just maybe if we go, what can we do to motivate these guys to not get killed by us? It's it is really sick stuff.
Let's talk about the three men that are chosen. I mean, one we've already talked about. Paris is chosen by his commanding officer Roger, who's going to make sure he doesn't go down for the scouting mission thing, right? So there's that one. All right, they choose Arnaud randomly by lot, and the irony there is he's been cited for bravery twice. So now they're going to execute him for cowardice on behalf of everyone else. And then they choose Farrell, Timothy Carey, who was in The Killing. We talked about him. Picked by his commanding officer because he's a, quote, social undesirable. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think this guy's problem is, other than he's just a little off?
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's all the excuse they need is that he's a little off. He's definitely Tim Carey for sure.
Mean, you know what? I was like feeling Cowardly Lion and the Wizard of Oz off of this dude. Maybe it's because I've been listening to too much Courtney Dickinson music, but I just had that on my brain, and I was like, man, feels like the Cowardly Lion.
A little bit. I mean, yeah, he's a little bit of a Cowardly Lion's one way, maybe Man-Child is another. This guy's not.
That's a good one, yeah.
He's not. This guy isn't entirely matured yet, even though he looks like he's 45. He's and they decided let's cut this guy's life short for whatever reason.
Well, for Company B, he will die for Company B. Yeah, that's basically what we learn. And each of these men are in a different place when it all comes down. I mean, you see Dax, who is a criminal defense lawyer. He's gonna talk to them, and he tries to discuss with them ahead of time what to do. And what's funny to me is Farrell is just like the total like game over, man. Like he's already like we're dead. We're so dead. It doesn't matter. And Dax is trying to be the idealist and fight for them. The other two men, like what's interesting to me is Paris is the one that really is getting screwed here because he's being killed because somebody else screwed up. and he's going to make sure people know about it, but nobody's ever going to believe him, so he doesn't even bother with it. Like, he turns in material on it, but doesn't really do him any good, right? And Arnauld is the one who seems to just accept it until he gets really pissed off at the priest later on, so it gets knocked out. But I mean, that, I don't know. I found the three men, though, and the moments we had with them where they're coming to terms with their mortality, if you will, to be some harrowing stuff in the film. Like, it really messes with you.
They are. They're excellent characters and great performances by all three guys. And what is it? I think it's Paris who's one of the most heartbreaking things, is a very casual thing. He says, what is it? He gives a letter to his wife and says, she's not going to understand this. And then you realize, she really isn't going to understand this. So, we picked your husband out by random and we shot him because he didn't want to run into the explosions. It's like, there's a whole movie there. It's like, just like you could film a whole 90-minute scene of the wife having it all explained to her, because it really doesn't make sense at all.
And one would argue, would they even bother ever even to give her that letter? Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, they probably just threw it away the minute they walked out of there, because they're like, there's no way we're telling her. Why would you tell anybody back home that this is what you did? Like, it wasn't like this was going to be on CNN. That night. They were going to talk about this stuff. This is what happened in war, and they would just say, your husband died on the battlefield. The end. And that would be it, and he would just be another casualty in a trench somewhere, in a place that she's never, going to see or hear from. And it is sad, though, because, he's written that knowing, I took it as like he wrote that knowing he needed to say those things to her, knowing he'll never get to say them to her, and no one will ever say them to her, but he needed to get it off of his chest. Like, he couldn't die having that still in his head. Like, he had to get that out of him.
Oh, yeah, and it's also particularly brutal because, unless I'm mistaken with the timeline of the movie, they're, cutting to the chase here, but they are executed, like, within 48 hours of the actual battle.
Oh, yeah,
like,
they pull them off the battlefield quick to get this done. Like, this court is such a farce. I mean, they throw this. There's no stenographer. There's no written formal incident. There's no evidence that they're going to allow Dax to put in. I mean, it's complete sham from the beginning to the end. And that's when he lays that great line about, like, if you find these people guilty, it's going to haunt you. And they're like, whatevs. They do it anyway.
Yeah, this trial, turns into a Few Good Men all of a sudden. And with this, for some reason, even though, Kubrick was the original David Fincher in terms of being that freaking depressing, but I thought of Fincher, like, a lot, and stuff like House of Cards, with how horribly it goes and how depressing it is to sit through and witness this bureaucracy, how the soldiers, while they're being interviewed by the prosecuting attorney, they keep trying to explain, like, the logistics, the common sense of what was happening. And the prosecuting attorney keeps cutting them off. I said, that's not what I asked you. I said, did you turn around and run away or not? No details, answer the question. And it's disgusting. Joe Turkel's character gets cut off when Dax is trying to list all this guy's accommodations. And the judge cuts him off and says, well, that's irrelevant. That's totally irrelevant. Doesn't matter how brave he was in the past. We're talking about this one time he was a coward, and it's revolting.
I know it is. It shows you, and I think that's what Kubrick wants to show, is that these are people who live inside of their own world and their own rules. And when you try to apply any of the civility and logic that we would have to it, it doesn't make any sense. And they won't hear it because, again, that's not what I asked you. I wanted to know exactly this point, dot this I cross this T, and that's the end. And again, it's not black and white. It's actually much grayer. And what's interesting is after the sentence is brought down and they know what's going to happen, that's when the artillery officer shows up. Rousseau's his name. And he basically tells Dax, and has it all written up for him, about here's how Moreau tried to get me to fire on those guys and why I refused and everything, just in case. And like, they're not even going to call him before the court. They don't want to talk to him, nothing. But he's now, Dax has got that in his back pocket. And I was immediately sort of took with, like, well, I wonder what Dax is going to do with that. Because he doesn't, like, run up the steps immediately and go, hold on, I've got something for you. Like, he sort of puts it in his back pocket to pull out at a different time. It's almost like he knows once the court has ruled, there's nothing else he can do.
Yeah, he knows from the start. As surprised as he acted, he probably knew how this was all going to go from the start, with how cavalier the generals are about killing their own guys, and it's like it's almost like something out of Alice in Wonderland. It's like it's so surreal how Dax is just trying to bring common sense into this trial, and how he totally fails. He said, "Hey, listen, nobody got close to the German wire, myself included." And he's basically saying, Jesus, give him a break. Nobody could have survived that. And Dax, he sums up so great in that, in the closing remarks, saying, "Gentlemen, there are moments where I'm ashamed to be a part of the human race, and this is one such occasion." He talks about how if you kill these guys, it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life. But it's clear that these judges and lawyers really don't care. And Dax he's thinking too much of them to even threaten them with the haunting of their souls. Like these guys lost their souls a while ago, probably.
Well, yeah, and he does pick his battle to go and tell Brulard. He finds him at a ball that night and pulls him to the side basically and lays it all out for him. And Brulard just dismisses it. He's like, "You're trying to blackmail the general staff into sparing your men. We're not going to do that." But and he dismisses him immediately. And so that's when the final nail has hit, and you realize, God, there's no hope for these guys. And man, the execution scene is so. You talk about like Fincher depressing. I mean, it's so sad. You got the one guy who knows he's getting screwed. You have the one decorated guy who's got in a fight with somebody and got knocked out, so he's probably going to be dead anyway. Like he's got such a cracked skull now, so he's not even really alive to get shot. And then you got the crying guy, Timothy Carey's character, who just can't stop wailing. And like they keep trying to tell him, like, man, have some dignity, and all this kind of stuff. And he's the one that wants a blindfold. The nearly dead guy is like not able to answer. And then the other guy's like, I don't care, just get it on with and be on your way. It's so sad. But I do love how Dax makes his lieutenant like, okay, you're gonna do the final orders on this, and the guy's like, I don't know how to do that. He's like, oh, yeah, sure you do. You line them up, you pull your sword, you drop it, and everybody shoots, and then we go home. And it's like, ouch. So he made sure to put that guy in his place, and I think, like, for me cinematically, I wanted that because I'm like, that guy needed to get his at some point, and I feel like he'll probably get killed in battle at some point anyway. But I needed him to get a little bit of comeuppance right here, and the fact that he's got to carry this out now, that's Dax again, showing us the age-old rule. The bullshit does indeed roll downhill, my friend.
Oh, yeah. It's the closest thing to a satisfying moment is, before that firing squad, he calls in the lieutenant to break down what his job is going to be tomorrow. How about you got to, after they die, you also have to walk up to them and put a bullet in each of their heads yourself. And because the thing is, with that scene where the lieutenant and the corporal are arguing each other about what went down at the night recon mission, Dax walks right in. I like to think he knows the guy's drunk. He probably actually overheard all of that, and the only reason he didn't make a stink about it is because we got one of the biggest missions we're ever going to have tomorrow, and I kind of need every commanding officer I can get. I can't get a replacement for this idiot quick enough. But he knows what went down. He knows that the guy who didn't come back was killed by one of his own guys. So he has that in the back of his head all the time. He can't use that during the trial, but he can use that information, even though it's justice, he puts it forth into this really vicious piece of vengeance thing when the officer's like, I don't really want to do that. It's like, you got the job. That'll be all. Yeah. Get lost.
Well, Dax knows that there's only so much he can control. He's very pragmatic that way. And so he controls it. He's like, well, I can't change these people's mind about this, and I'm not going to put myself in their place because that's not protocol. So I'm going to make sure we do this. We're going to do it by the book. I'm going to make sure that sumbitch over there has something to do with it because clearly he wasn't any more fit to fight than any of these other people. And so I'm going to let him know that there are consequences for your actions, pal. And he puts it out there. And I mean, we get the scapegoat firing squad, and I mean it's as awful as you would think it would be. I mean, it's terrible. And what's amazing to me is you have the execution, and then you got Brulard and Moreau like gloating at breakfast about it. It's like, let's go shoot some dudes and have some waffles. I mean, it's very, it's so like dehumanizing and detached. And this is where you get a great Kirk Douglas scene. And he enters, he's been invited by Brulard because Brulard knows that he's like, well, I'm not going to let this, Moreau guy get off either because obviously he's not fit for a higher command. So we're going to have to, deal with that. And Dax just gave me the ammunition for it. So, okay, I'll go ahead and ruin him now. And I love how he turns on him. You know, again, Brulard is, like, I never took him as either evil or good. He's just the system. He's just the ultimate part of the system here. And so when he turns the guns basically on Moreau, I love how he tries to squeeze him out of it one more time. And he's like, he's just so offended that this one, how could you dare say this to me? You know, and all this stuff. I'm like, man, they've got you so dead to rights. I mean, they have more on you than they had on any of those other guys.
Yeah.
So he's as dead as anybody else. But I do love him as he kind of huffs out of the room there. It's a good moment for McCready. And then, again, it's a good moment of Brulard, too.
Oh, yeah, this is my favorite scene of the movie. Like, the men are dead. Dax he's done with it all. He's probably done with the whole French army. He could not care about anything. So when he's offered Moreau's job, he doesn't accept. He couldn't care less about climbing the ladder like Moreau does. And he just genuinely can't believe that the generals really they just give they just don't give a shit about the lives of their soldiers. And he lets him have it. Brulard demands an apology to this, to talk him back and says, yeah, I'm sorry I'm sorry I wasn't faster about telling you that you're degenerate. And
you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And he gives him that great Douglas voice, too.
Oh, big time. Like Kirk Douglas, because Kirk Douglas, for the most part, keeps his voice down in this movie. Like he's famous for being these gritty, very angry characters. And for this entire movie, he's kind of reserved. He's a very intelligent guy. But he's been through so much stuff. Literally, he's had to go through the battle and this trial in a 48-hour span, and so he finally does explode into some Kirk Douglas anger.
What he's mad about though, and what gets me is he's not mad that Brulard is so indifferent about all of these men's death. He sort of already knows that. He's mad that Brulard thought that Dax was trying to stop the executions as a way to gain Moreau's job, that he himself was a political animal. He's like more offended by that than anything else. And he's like, I'm going to let you know right now the kind of person I am. And I think that's exactly why they get the immediate call, you're going back to the battlefield. That's a death sentence, basically. It's like they are beaten half to hell already. And now he's like, nope, you guys are going back out right now. And he's like, well, that means we're all going to our deaths, boys. That's the look on his face when they tell him that. Oh yeah, and
then the scene ends with this really nice bit where Brulard, he breaks down the whole thing because Brulard, he's not a total idiot. He knows he does hand over. He does talk about Moreau. He's going to fry Moreau for what he did. And Brulard, he breaks it all down politically, and he asks Dax, "When you break it down, what have I done wrong?" And Dax says, "Well, if you really don't know, then I do pity you."
Yeah, it's like I can't do anything with you if you don't realize that. It's sad to think of, but I mean, the funny thing is we're talking about this movie and it's 60 years old, and we still live in a world where some people just can't see what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah,
and they're in incredible places of power.
Sometimes.
I mean, that's just how it goes. It's like, wow. But we get this last scene here, and it almost feels like a coda, because for me, the movie ends when, they tell Dax, like, you got orders to go back to the front. And I know that happens after this next scene, but you see a lot of the soldiers, like, partying at an inn, and they bring out this captive German girl who later becomes Kubrick's wife, I understand, in real life. But she sings, like, this little folk song or whatever, which I'm sitting there going, like, well, that's pretty. I have no idea what you're saying. Something about cows and the countryside. I remember very little of any German I ever bothered to learn. But what's neat is that Dax has the orders, and he's told, go get your men, return to the front, and he decides, I'm going to give them 5 minutes. Like they seem to actually be not thinking about what they've been through the last 3 days or the last how many ever years they've been in this thing, and I'm going to let them enjoy this before I tell them basically we've all been sentenced to die now, to go back out on the field.
Yeah, this scene... Again, like you said, like you could have cut to black right on, Dax saying, I pity you, and that sums up the message of the movie. But then, it carries on a bit more to this scene, and I love how, like, these guys in the bar, like, like they're soldiers, they're about to ship out, they're extremely rowdy, they're ready for some entertainment, like, and they see this girl come out, and if this was a movie today, they'd be screaming, take it off or whatever. Like they're that kind of spirit. And then she starts singing that song, and little by little they all quiet down, and they go from being quiet down and listening to everyone in the room. We get all these great close-ups of these guys, all older guys too. Everyone in the room is in tears as they're humming along to the song. You can see, they're not thinking about the war, but they are all being reminded of their families and friends back home, and how there's really a good chance they're never going to see any of them again. And the number one thought on any of these guys' minds, just, man, I want to go home. And it is one of the saddest scenes in movie history. It ranks with stuff like Requiem for a Dream, where you look at the whole room and you realize it's like, it's not going to go well for any of these guys. Half of them are going to die, and the other half are going to be stuck with the images of watching the other half die. And now, rewatching the movie as many times as I have, as in prep for this pod, maybe it's lost some of that effect on me, but you let some time pass and you watch it a little fresher, and that scene just, it wrecks me. It's one of those scenes where it's like a small list of scenes where it's like, if you don't cry during that scene, there's something wrong with you. It's one of those scenes where Spielberg, he said he put the movie on for his friends that had never seen the film, and he might have just put on that scene, and even out of context, the whole room in 3 minutes were all of a sudden in tears. And that, that's how moving the scene is.
It's a beautiful ending to what has been a really dour and ugly thing.
Yeah.
For the most part. And I think that's why Kubrick stuck it on there, is that he didn't want to leave people, unlike Fincher, who would have left us in the gutter, bleeding and crying. He wanted to leave us with a little bit of hope, like love is still there. Kubrick's a love guy, as we'll get into later on. But no, it's a good ending of the film. I'm with you. They could have just cut to black on the Kirk Douglas explosion, but it's almost better that they don't. That there's just that extra little beat, that little epilogue that tells and this is what became of these men, and it's a fascinating tale. Again, I mean, I watched this thinking, I'm certain this has been it could be adapted. If it hasn't been, this would be a heck of a 3 or 4 person play if you wanted to do some choppy acting and stuff like that. I think it would be pretty interesting. But I think we're at the point of the podcast, Kurt, where it's time to give final thoughts and popcorn ratings for the film. So what are yours for Paths of Glory?
Well, Paths of Glory is a film I feel gets overlooked in Kubrick's filmography. Like, I had seen the last 5 Kubrick films. I'd never even heard of Paths of Glory until I heard about it Empire Magazine, and then I finally checked it out, and I was like, wow, why don't people talk about this? And it's like, the only reason it's so overlooked is because Kubrick that's just the kind of stuff he made. Like, when you make 2001: A Space Odyssey, that does kind of overshadow this black and white 80-minute war movie like Paths of Glory. But Paths of Glory is it's amazing. It's one of those movies, if anyone else made that, it would be their best film. And it ranks really high with me with Kubrick movies. And one reason is that it's the most emotional film of his I've seen. I haven't seen Lolita yet at this time, but Paths of Glory is the only movie of his that he's made that can make me cry. And the rest of his movies are amazing, but they're admittedly cold films. And this is Kubrick going for the heart more than the brain. He does go for the brain, but he's really going for the heart in this movie, especially that the last final act of this movie, and he hits a bullseye. The entire cast is better than most 50s movies where the acting can be questionable at times. But this is
a nice way to say it.
Yeah, but the acting it absolutely holds up. Where even if you wanted to remake this movie, there's nothing about it that needs to be remade. It's like the acting holds up for in 2017. The action, the tension of the war stuff is fantastic. It's a great encapsulation of what World War I combat was like, and it's also an amazing anti-war film showing you everything that's wrong with war, with the beginning, middle, and aftermath of war. Kirk Douglas gives one of my favorite performances any actor has ever given. And shockingly, this movie crams so much amazing story, writing, action in under 90 minutes and doesn't feel rushed for a second. There's not a wasted second of screen time. And it is a shame that Kubrick it'd be, that's just the way his films went. But it would have been interesting what the 80-minute version of, The Shining would have been like, or so forth. But I'm probably going to be saying this a lot over the course of the Kubrick films, but Paths of Glory really is one of the best films ever made, and it's an extra large popcorn for me.
I agree with you in the extra large popcorn. I think the theme of this holds up even today. We've talked a lot about it here on the show, and it's one of those that I didn't know it was a Kubrick film, and I bet 4/5 of our audience or more probably didn't know that either. And maybe hasn't even seen it if they do know it. And it's definitely one that I will be revisiting again. And I've told a lot of people about it, having seen it again, and told them you really need to sit down and spend an hour and 20 minutes with this, because it's not very long, and it'll grab you quick. And again, the theme of it is something that still works today in so many different settings. It's such a beautifully shot thing. I mean, again, for $900,000 and a script and storyline that a lot of people weren't really jazzed about doing, it turned out looking great, and the performances are fantastic. I do think it's one of Douglas's best performances, and that's saying something for somebody that's been in as many films as he's been in. And look, it built a relationship with him. It's why the next film is a Kubrick film, because Douglas called Stanley Kubrick in to come and save Spartacus. And please come and fix this and direct this. And it's, we'll talk about that one next. We start getting into some of these epic Kubrick films. That one goes 184 minutes. So that's going to be a minute to get through. But, I think you've hit on something there, though, that's a great summation of it, Kurt, is that this is a film where if you want to see Kubrick's heart a little bit, I think it's here. I think it was going to be, again, in what became AI, had he have lived long enough to shoot it and do it, that probably would have been there. And it's probably why he and Spielberg got along so well, because Spielberg is all heart. I mean, he just is. He's just a big heart. And I think that's one reason Stanley liked him as much as he did, was because he did, that wasn't him. He was an intellectual. He was a logic guy in a lot of ways, but he had a soft side too that he didn't show a lot of people. And I think Steven was one of those guys that he just wears it on his sleeves, and so that's why they got along, among other things, other than also being incredible artistes, if you will. But it's a really good just film by itself. Definitely worth seeing and checking out, folks. So I recommend it highly. Extra large popcorn for me. I'm excited about talking about Spartacus, man, because I got to tell you, I've only seen that movie once, and I don't remember anything about it because I've seen so many sword and sandal flicks. We did one way back when me and you and Nick did Gladiator. People want to dig that out of the archives. It's a good podcast too. I'll just go ahead and pitch that out there. Dig that one up, folks. But and I don't know that we even talked about Spartacus in that, but I'll tell you what I know about this one so much is there's a movie Tom Hanks did called That Thing You Do, and the Tom Everett Scott, the drummer in that movie, constantly references Spartacus as like his sort of motivation for doing things, and he does all this little jazz drum riffing that he calls "Hi, I'm Spartacus," and that's but it's at the time when that movie would have been huge, and I'm like, okay, so I asked my dad about that. He's like, oh man, yeah, I remember that one. That was awesome, back for its day. And I thought, okay, this is going to be fun to see Kirk Douglas in like action prime. This is Kirk Douglas swinging swords and just wiping out, armies and making out with women and all these things that we kind of know him for. But this historical drama too that was part of the war, the severe wars and stuff. So I'm curious to revisit that one. I don't have many memories of it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because it'll be interesting talking about how it's Kubrick as just a workman director taking a gig as opposed to, spending 4 years crafting a movie from the inside.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things that, again, it's an adaptation from a book, but it wasn't his idea. He got brought into it because, again, he had the relationship with the star. But it is something that launched him for sure, because after Spartacus, I don't think he was ever the same as far as the kind of control he had on projects and what he could move his hands and get made. That movie launched him into Hollywood, A-list gold for the rest of his life. So I'd be curious to get to that one. We've done kind of a couple of the lesser known Kubrick films, and I think we found one that's kind of fun and then a real gem in this one. So it'll be fun to see how the big budget, big action spectacle Spartacus holds up the next time we come around. But lots of cool stuff we're dropping around on Film Strip here late spring, early summer, folks. folks. I mean, if you've been keeping up on the feed, Nick and I just reviewed The Wraith with the Charlie Sheen 80s flick, which you do owe it to yourself to see if you haven't seen that one. And so we did that. We did the Jaws films to start off the first of the year, and Kurt and I've done this one. And we're doing some different things coming out here. But one I'm real excited about, Brian and Ron and I are teaming back up to do the Scream series, the
Nice.
4 Scream films. It's been a while since I've visited those two, and I'm really interested to talk about those. We've kind of done the 4 other big horror ones. I mean, we did Halloween, Hellraiser, Friday the 13th, The Nightmare on Elm Street. The only thing left is Psycho, and I don't really know that I ever want to see Psycho 4 again for any reason other than maybe torture. Because it's real bad. But this is kind of the thing that came from all of those in a lot of ways. And later this year we'll get into Texas Chainsaw and some other stuff. But lots of cool stuff coming again. You can always follow our feed. Search for Continuous Play Podcast Film Strip on iTunes and Stitcher. So we're on both avenues now. And, of course, you can follow us on Facebook. Catch up with us on Facebook and on the Fabish Factor Film Podcast page. If you want to join that, you can request to join the group. And that's usually where we post a lot of our episode discussions, or we just give Kurt a lot of mess for being Canadian and, whatever else hits us for the day. And actually, we talk a lot about Star Wars over there, so if you're down for that, we should mention it here because I've been asked by a few people about this. The Last Jedi trailer, of course, is out now and everything. We're recording this in April, and it'll be out in April of the year. That movie doesn't come out until December, and I get asked a lot, like, are you guys going to keep doing Star Wars films? And as far as I'm concerned, yeah, we're going to be back for Episode 8.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that one. I'm going to try to do what I did with Force Awakens again. I'm going to try to go in cold. I've seen the trailer once now, and I'm vowing to not watch it again. So,
well, good luck.
I've turned off all my auto video feeds, and I'm just trying to shun my eyes away. So we'll see if I can get it done. But we'll be back again for more Kubrick later on. We've got Spartacus coming up, Lolita. That's one I've never seen that one either, Kurt. I know what it's about, but I've never seen it. Barry Lyndon, which I don't know anything about. So we'll be fun. 2001. We're going to take a sidetrack here, though, because it's not part of the Kubrick retrospective, but we can't do 2001 and not do 2010.
Sure.
We've got to do 2010. So we'll throw that one in there, too, and start churning through the Kubrick here as we get on through. So, again, folks, thanks for joining us here on Film Strip. Until next time, for Kurt, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to the podcast.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. Please leave us a positive review on iTunes and link up with us on Facebook. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121.